All right, my friends, I'm going to prove to you once and for all that inflation is nothing to be fearful of, all right? It's not inflation you got to worry about. I'll share what you need to worry about next after I show you why you don't need to worry about inflation. But let's just dive into this. Everyone and their mom says, inflation, oh my goodness, it's going to eat us all alive. The dollar's devalued, blah, 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 blah. Had one guy say, the dollar lost half its value after in the 50s, and that's simply not true. In the 50s are actually mild inflation, except for 2 years directly after World War II. It's just not true. In the 30s, I think the guy even said after World War, in the 20s it did as well. It's just it's factually incorrect. It did not. Even if it were so, I'm going to share with you again, I'll prove to you it doesn't matter. Anyway, so let's look at this. We got the 50s, the 70s, and 90s. We're going to start in 1950. Then we're going to go to 1970 for the day your buddy Josh was born. 1970, I was born. So this is going to go back 70 years. And we're going to look at the inflation of various amounts of products. When we're going to show you that when all is said and done, you're like, oh, actually, it's good that we're better off now than we were then by far, even though the price of the dollar has gone down significantly. The value of the dollar has gone down. It's a meaningless thing. So we're going to look at average income. We're going to look at your average house. And I'm using average. I think here we're using median. So we didn't have medians back in the Census Bureau stuff back in the 50s. So we're just using average. So it might be off by $1,000 or $2,000 across the board. But basically the point is still well made. New car. Initially I was using a Ford. And then actually it's funny. I was looking at newspapers.com. And looking at some of the sales ads from back in the old days is pretty interesting. We'll go into this here in just a second about how much things have changed and how much better it is now than it was back then. A loaf of bread, price of a stamp, that's a little bit disingenuous because the price of a stamp is regulated. Then a pound of sirloin steak. All right. So in 1950, the average income was $3,200 a year. That's the average household income, which is $268 a month. The average house was $7,150. You want to go out? There you go. Good boy. And what that means is it costs 2.2 years of your salary, your average income, to buy a house, if that makes sense. All right. So you needed to work basically 2.25 years to be able to afford a house if you're going to pay cash for it. Just FYI. You coming back in? Okay. Here we go. Well, Pablo. All right. A new car costs $1,800 back then. On average, $1,800, which means it costs 0.56% of your total income. All right, so basically more than half of your total income on a new car back then. I hope that makes sense. All right, so basically it costs you 2.25 of your times your income to buy a new house. It costs you a little bit more than half of your income on an annual basis to buy a car. Bread was 14 cents a loaf, and I'm dividing 14 cents by this number right here, your monthly income, which means it costs whatever, 0.0005% of your monthly income for a loaf of bread. A stamp was 3 cents back then, which means it costs 0.0001 of your monthly income to buy a stamp, and a pound of sirloin was 0.77 cents, or 77 cents, excuse me, which meant it cost 0.0028 to buy a pound of sirloin steak. All right, so let me just go through the numbers and we'll comment on this. In 1970, the average U.S. income was $9,800, of which, if you want to divide it by monthly, it's $822. The price to buy a home went up from basically 2.25 to 2.3. So basically, cost you almost 3 years of your salary to buy a home. The price of a car, though, went down. It's only a little bit more than a third of your salary for a year's salary to buy a car, whereas back then it was over one half your salary to buy a car. The price of a loaf of bread went down relative to your monthly income. So your monthly income is $822. The price of a loaf of bread cost a quarter, which meant it went from 0.005 to 0.0003, all right, or 0.0005 to 0.003. The stamp went up, went from the cost 0.0001 to 0.0007, and the price of a pound of sirloin went down in half, from 0.0028 to 0.0014 relative to your income. Interesting. So the housing went up a little bit. The cars went down. The bread went down, the sirloin went way down. The only thing that went up was the stamp. Pretty interesting. So inflation was happening in the 70s, 50s, and 60s, and yet were you better off? I would say you were. All right, let's go to now. All right, so now the average income, again, this is actually the median income, but the average will probably pretty doggone close, actually. $62,000, so it's $5,166 is what the monthly income is. It costs you 4 years of your income to buy a new home today. 4 years of your income is that's the median value of a home. That's what it is, the median value. So it costs you 4 years of your income to buy the median home in today's United States. It costs you 0.61% of, you have to work 60. It's a new car cost 60% of a year's of income. All right, so if you're making $62,000, you have to work 60% of that year in which to afford a new car, which is much higher than it was in 1970, but right around the same as it was in 2000 and 1950. Does that make sense? So 0.61% is what it costs, or 0.61% of an annual income to buy a car. So both these are pretty significantly higher. The house certainly is almost double. The car is almost a lot more than it was in 1970, but close to what it was in 1950. All right, bread has gone down from 1950, right in the range of what is in 1970, so 0.004. A stamp is 0.0001, so way down. And the price of sirloin is way down from what it was in 1950, 0.0016. All right, so what we're seeing here is the cost of living is certainly higher than what it was back then. To buy a home, to buy a car, to buy some bread is less, to buy sirloin is less from 1950, and to buy a stamp is much less. And again, I chuck at the stamp just because it's regulatory, not so much supply and demand. But I want to point out something. When you're looking at the advertisements for cars in 1950, some were advertising new car, heater in the car, a heater, not air conditioning, a heater. Some cars had no heat in them. Not mine, up and down door, the automatic windows, not mine, Bluetooth, GPS, all that stuff. No heat. Some cars had no heat, never mind air conditioning. Can you find any car, and hell, did they even have automatics back then? I doubt it. So now we have automatics, we have air conditioning, we have heat, we have heated seats, we got Bluetooth, we got everything you could possibly imagine in a vehicle today. Whereas before, some of the cars had no heat, no heater in there. I mean, basically, they didn't have any air conditioning, certainly. So no air conditioning. A house. How many houses had air conditioning back then? Not even half of the houses had air conditioning, and they were units, not central air conditioning. The houses back then had those standalone units, window units, if they had any. Certainly not central air conditioning. How many houses were burning clean burning natural gas? A lot of houses were burning good old-fashioned fireplaces for it to heat. Certainly not central heating with central natural gas. How many houses had plumbing? A lot of houses didn't have plumbing back then. All right, so even though the price of a house has gone up almost twice, what do you get for that house? How big were the houses back then? They're tiny, postage stamp stuff. Tiny. Now you got, this right here at my house right now would be a mansion compared to someone in 1950. All right, that's just a fact. And now, so it's gone up by twice, but what are you getting? You're getting air conditioning, you're getting heating, you're getting a bigger house for sure. You're getting indoor plumbing, better ventilation, better insulation. All right, bread. Well, bread. To be perfectly honest with you, it costs roughly the same. All that's about the same. All right, bread. You can get that anywhere at any time. Not going to talk about stamp. We're going to talk about sirloin steak. I don't know about you. When I was growing up in the 1970s, having steak was a treat, man. You did not have steak. Now, basically, anyone can get steak at any time. Now, that might be a problem because we consume so doggone much in terms of our health, eating all this crap all the time. But we didn't have steak hardly ever. It was a luxury item, steak. Now, anyone can get steak, man, for the most part. I get it. If you're real poor, it's going to be hard to get steak. but basically any even lower middle class family can get steak if they want. It's abundant. Now again, we can make an argument about the way steak is being shipped, about the manufacturing of it. I get all that. I get it. But to say that inflation has decimated the dollar and thus we're all worse off is just, it's freaking stupid. It's a dumb thing to say. It's simply not true. It's not. We are much better off from a living perspective. I didn't even want to go into color TVs because there wasn't any in 1950. There was no internet. There was no cell phone. I mean, how many people actually had phones back then? Very few, right? And so here's not inflation that you have to worry about. This is why this election coming up is so important. It's innovation. Innovation. I just listened to James Altucher talking to Matt Ridley, who writes for the Wall Street Journal, the rational optimist. And his concern is we've been regulating innovation pretty heavily, where we're relying on the experts too much. And I'm putting words in his mouth, but basically that's what he's saying. You go back to the old days of the Wright brothers. They owned a bike shop, for instance. You see what I'm saying? What Eisenhower talked about, the tinkerer in his garage is being replaced by an educated elite of mindless robots, essentially, who said you have to think this way, you have to think this way, you have to think this way. How dare you to challenge the orthodox of the education establishment, the credentialed masses? And that's scary, because if we don't get innovation, then we're doomed. Because what happens then you have stagnation. When that is when inflation can be bad. So think about it. You got Venezuela, massive inflation, no growth whatsoever. Right? Has nothing to do with the collapse of their dollar. It has to do with the collapse of the economy. What we do, we have innovation, where we get new products, reduce the price of old products, throw out old products to increase our standard of living, even though while the value of the dollar declines. Inflation is not the enemy. It's stagnation by regulation, which gets rid of innovation. I didn't mean to say all those shins all together, but there you go. Conjunction, junction, what's your function? I'm going to get you there if you're very careful. You know that song? Put in the show notes if you know where that song is. Conjunction, junction, what's your function? But anyway, so innovation and growth is what we need to make sure we respect, we value. It's not a declining dollar. The dollar has been declining over the 70 years, the 50 years of my life. The value of the dollar has been declining, and yet the life expectancy, the living standards have gone incredibly up. I mean, you can go back to color TVs, phones. You can go back to anything, clothes, food. Think how much better off you are than you were 50 years ago when I was born, or 70 years ago when some of you all might have been born. You're so much better off. You have meat, of abundant citrus. You couldn't get citrus back to the old days because it had to be shipped. There's no shipping of products from freaking Greece or anything like that. I didn't even know what a microwave was. When I was in Honduras, it was the first time I ever used a microwave. And I remember I was putting in tinfoil, and my squad leader, Sergeant Jack, said, "What the hell are you doing?" I said, "Wait." He goes, "You can't put tinfoil in a microwave." I said, "Really?" I didn't know what it was. He goes, "You never used a microwave?" I said, "No." Now we got microwaves. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. How much improved our lives are relative to what it was back then, even though we've had a declining of the dollar. Who gives two craps if the dollar's declining, as long as innovation is making things better, which it is. Not to see this is to put your head in the sand and say, "Oh my goodness, we're doomed." Doomed, I tell you. Don't do that. Inflation, the dollar losing value, is no big deal as long as we keep making sure innovation is still out there, where people can profit from the products they create to better your life. So I hope this helps you not worry about it. I am not worried about inflation all the time at all. Now I will say, lastly, the doomsday on inflation is always fixed income stuff, right? So fixed income bonds, fixed income certificates of deposit, fixed income annuities. Those are always going to be, because they aren't growing. All right, those things aren't being grown. They're not innovating. They're just fixed. So the value loss of a dollar is gradually swamping what you're getting on anything fixed income. So from an investment perspective, yes, inflation is bad, absolutely, for fixed stuff, but growing stuff, or stuff that gives you a utility, A house, for instance, a place you can live in. A stock that you can grow as a company innovates and grows is profit margin. All those are absolutely what you should be investing in during inflationary stuff, without question. Inflation in and of itself is a killer of fixed income. That's a fact. Inflation in and of itself is not a killer of growing stuff that gives you utility. Farmland, for instance, farmland. Just real estate. This is why I say, look, real estate. Now, real estate, it depends, location. But at the end of the day, people still need a place to live, all right? And so as the dollar declines, they're going to pay increasing amount of money relative to the value for your home because they still have to have a place to live. So when it comes to investing, you got to be careful of anything fixed on inflation. But when it comes to investing in equities, that's why you still own some gold, because gold is a complete remove from the value of the dollar relative to inflation. So you still own some actual hard gold, not the stocks. But anyway, inflation is not going to kill stocks. I mean, I've gone over this a million times a Sunday. There's no 100% correlation if inflation kills stocks. In fact, you could even make an argument inflation doesn't doom bonds. Historically, I would be very, very hesitant to make that argument, simply because inflation will destroy stocks without question. Especially with the interest rates as they are now. So anyway, don't worry about inflation. All right, thanks now.